if you want to pick a good project manager for this project, you don't necessarily need to pick somebody who's got high technical skills, but management and communication skills are much more important.
Hello and welcome to LNG TV. On today's episode of LNG Leaders, we're discussing mega projects, and we're delighted to welcome Louis Bon. Louis spent 40 years with Total, focusing on mega projects and operations management. In a highly international career, he's worked in Norway, across the Middle East and Africa, before his final role as managing director of the integrated ICHTHYS LNG Project. He saw that $45 billion project through to successful startup in 2019. Now Louis is a strategic advisor, so we look forward to discussing his views on the changing world of mega projects. So from the south of France, we welcome you, Louis, to LNG TV.
Thank you very much.
It's great to have you with us. You were part of the panel of experts for McKinsey's The Art of Project Leadership report. Having successfully delivered over $55 billion worth of projects yourself, you're well qualified to answer the question whether project leadership is actually more of an art or a science.
Well, thank you, Will. That's a very good question, actually, because project people are different, are always considered as a little bit special in the company. And I would say maybe it's a little bit of both, actually. It's certainly a science because you need to know the processes, you need to know how to manage the project, how to manage the contracts. But it's a good idea to call that an art as well, because again, project managers are a little bit different in the sense that they have to manage a huge project and a huge team, and it's a little bit like being in a fortress. So you want to make sure that people inside are happy to be there and excited to do the work, but you need to protect everyone against the outsiders. And to do that, well, there's ways to do it. It's even more complex than the normal managing a company for a CEO, for example. And you have to protect your project. You have to ensure the ownership. And sometimes you have to play a role and act a little bit more than in other situations. So yes, it's the art of project management, indeed.
We'll be discussing that art a little bit later, but first just mega projects in general. ICHTHYS was $45 billion. Do you think that such large integrated LNG projects will be seen again in the future?
Well, if we're talking about LNG, definitely, because we need LNG. We need LNG to replace oil. We need energy to be able to get rid of coal as much as we can. The renewable energies are obviously the top priority for everyone today, but it will take some time to have enough and to put them in place. So LNG is very important, and a lot of companies know that. So yes, there will be more LNG projects. They are always big projects, expensive. They will be different because of the more and more pressure on the environmental side, but there will be more. $45 billion, well, I don't know. This one was a little bit extreme. It's a big project, several offshore floaters, Australia, but there will be more. Yes, you can see in Qatar, actually. Qatar has just launched a huge project on their side as well, for example.
Do you feel that the development of mega projects has changed over the years, or do you think it's going to change in the future?
Oh yes, it's always changed or progressed in the last 20 years since I've been dealing with big projects. The way to manage them, the way to deal with the contractors, but today there's a definite change because the projects have to be much more focused on low CO2 emissions in particular, and that puts a big constraint on the project in terms of cost as well. And also because of today, everybody's realized that a huge crisis like what we've seen with the COVID can actually happen, and that increases the risks. So all the stakeholders, companies and contractors, they face this in a different manner. So So they tend to be more protective. They change the way they are going to work. The risk increases for everyone. So yes, the project will be definitely very different after this present period.
So you're currently, Louis, working as a sort of strategic projects advisor to Inpex and other global energy companies. I'm interested in terms of your role as a strategic advisor, your view on what are the sorts of things, particularly in the changing world that we're talking about and living in today, what are the sorts of things that are keeping CEOs up at night?
Well, I hope they can sleep peacefully and compartmentalize. Otherwise, they will have a hard time. But that being said, I think a few years ago, the CEO's main issue was profitability of my company, the discoveries of the exploration wells in progress. And today, it's very different. Today, the CEO must really have difficulties. They must really have difficulties to sleep at night, wondering whether their company will still exist in a few months' time or in a few years' time. Because today, it's really a question of survival. Either you adapt to the new environment or you don't survive. So that's certainly a different scale of worries, of concerns for the CEO and CEOs, and that's why you see all the majors, all the contractors, all the companies reacting so violently to what's happening today.
Yeah, I'd like to just kind of keep on that, because I think that that's a hugely interesting point that you've made, that oil and gas companies and energy companies as a whole are going to have to evolve and change. That change for certain organizations is going to be larger than it is for others. With the energy transition, how are you advising and talking to the companies that you're advising with regards to developing low carbon solutions?
Well, the companies need to change. They need to find a good pace of change. They still need to. Sometimes they tend to want to change a little bit fast as well, and they need to remember that oil and gas is still here, and whether we like it or not, we still need oil and gas for quite some time until we found other sustainable solutions. We need oil and gas to profitable oil and gas to get cash so that we can finance also the renewable energies. So there needs to be a change. And today the issue is that because this has happened without much warning, actually, so violently, everybody is looking into different directions. So you look around you and everybody talks about new energies, renewable, low CO2. So you hear a lot about hydrogen, about ammonia, carbon capture, carbon CO2 reinjection, wind, solar. And today it's still a little bit immature in the sense that you don't know in which direction you should go. You cannot, a company, in particular smaller companies, cannot start investing everywhere, right? So they need to make the right decision and wait a little bit and see what's going to happen. So my advice at the moment is to look a little bit everywhere, to take some steps in the directions that I mentioned there, and then wait where is the rest of the world going, so that we'll be ready to massively invest in one direction or the other. But definitely CO2, carbon capture, carbon injection are things that will be needed to develop our big projects in the future, for example.
And hopefully some big projects in the future. Regarding managing these mega projects, do you think that to be successful, the skill set that you've got is closer to a CEO rather than a project director?
Well, that's a very interesting question, and I've had this debate in the past before, in particular when a few years ago in Total, when I wanted to convince my boss that I was doing the job of a CEO actually, and not just a project manager, which sometimes is not considered the way it should be. But all joke apart, it's it's at the same time similar and very different. It's similar in the way that when you are a project director, you are responsible of budgets that a lot of CEOs have never even been dealing with. ICHTHYS is a little bit extreme. My previous project in Angola, pass floor, was $9 billion, but that's still a lot of money. And the teams you manage are huge. Can be several hundred, several thousand people. So sometimes it's quite a lot more than a lot of CEOs. You have the same kind of challenges in managing teams, in setting objectives. But the big difference is that a project is a permanent crisis. So you're like a crisis management director for 3, 4, 5 years nonstop. So it's a little bit challenging for you, for your family, because you never stop, and you don't have the time in front of you to try different things and to get prepared as much as you can when you are the CEO of a company on the long term. So it's the same, probably even higher level of responsibilities, but it's a very different job.
And you came from an engineering background. Lots of people might come into project management from more commercial or management background. What elements from your early career do you think have helped with mega projects?
Well, you know what they call engineering schools in France is not, there's a little bit of engineering, but there's a little bit of everything else, including management. So I know I usually say I come from engineering side, but it's not 100% correct. Anyway, I think you learn on the spot, you learn on the company. It's good to have some technical background because it's good to know what the project is about, technically speaking. It's good to be able to challenge the teams, the specialists, but it's not the most important. I mean, the most important is the management communication side. That's much more difficult to gain. It's mainly experience, I think, and you always learn all the time. And in fact, I was explaining that to the CEO of Inpex recently, and I mentioned that if you want to pick a good project manager for this project, you don't necessarily need to pick somebody who's got high technical skills, but management and communication skills are much more important. So you're never well prepared, I think, but you prepare yourself on the spot and you learn all the time.
And what skills do you think that you've learnt over the years when you're managing projects on the scale of ICHTHYS and other big projects? What's been the steepest learning curve or things that you perhaps wish you'd known before?
Oh, you learn a lot all the time, but I think one of there's two things in terms of learning curves. Each time the last two big projects I've been in charge, so pass floor in Angola and ICHTHYS in Australia, I joined the project about 1 year after the project started. I replaced another person each time, and there you have a very steep learning curve because very quickly you're on the spot. You have people knocking at your door and asking for solutions, and you need to learn very quickly. But the other thing I've learned, and sometimes the hard way, is that the project is like a high-speed train, like the Shinkansen they have in Japan, or the TGVs we have in France, and you go through small country stations at the speed of the high-speed trains, and then you have people standing on the side in the station who want to be part of it, but they only can take the suburbs train or the normal train, and you need to slow down sometimes to take them on board because you don't want to leave people on the side of the road, and sometimes if you go too fast, that's what happens, and after you regret it, and these people get a little bit frustrated. So you need to learn how to get the project going fast enough, but you need to slow down.
I mean, I think the fact that you're talking about people being so important, your career has been hugely international, which obviously means you've been dealt with people from all over the world throughout your career. I mean, just a quick look at your bio. You've worked in frontier projects in Qatar, Angola, Iran, and obviously most recently in Australia. Is working on kind of greenfield frontier projects a different challenge each time, or is it basically just a similar challenge in a different place?
It's the same topics, but it's a very different challenge each time. The topics is, as you mentioned, it's people, because like a lot of other things, before all, it's all about people, keeping them safe, keeping them motivated, and getting them to work together, which is the most, probably the most difficult, breaking the silos. So each time it's different because it depends a lot of the different cultures. I've worked with many different people over the years, and each culture is very different. So you need to learn about it. You need to consider it, and sometimes you have very little time to do that. And then you deal also with a lot of stakeholders, dealing with the Australian authority like NOPSEMA for offshore, or dealing with the national Iranian oil company for the project South Pars in Iran. As you can imagine, it's very different operating modes. So you need to totally, how could I say, reset yourself each time and learn almost from zero. But the topics are the same.
You've led the development of a number of sizable new organisations. What do you think are some of the most important organisational, talent and cultural lessons that you've learned over the years?
Well, I think it's a little bit what I was starting to mention before. You need to consider the cultural side of the organization, how people feel about the way you manage, about working with the others, and how people understand you. To be honest, although I speak English with a horrible French accent, I know, but I've never had any problems to make myself understood or to understand other people. My last job in Australia was a little bit more complicated because I got very used very quickly to understand people speaking with the Australian accent. But I noticed after many months that the opposite was not true. People had very many problems understanding what I was saying. And sometimes I would come out of a meeting thinking that I gave very clear instructions. And then I realized, talking to some of these people, that sometimes they understood actually the opposite of what I meant. So communicating with people, communicating with different cultures, and it's your job, it's my job to adapt. But sometimes it takes a long time to even realize that there's something not right.
Louis, if you were starting your career over today, what would be the sorts of markets and sectors that would excite you the most?
Well, I mean, I love the job I've done. I love the career I've had with Total in particular over 40 years. I have really enjoyed, in particular, the last projects that I've been in charge of, in Passflor, in Angola and ICHTHYS. I've really enjoyed the previous project where I was not myself in charge, but I was part of them. And the only regret I have is it took me a few years before I decided to switch into projects when I was in Total at the beginning. So I wish I'd done that earlier. But today, in addition to that, I'm really in full admiration when I see people and it's nothing to do with energy. I watch the project managers that are in charge of the Mars program for the NASA. And I watched recently when the Mars robot landed, and we had these videos of the team in the room with the project manager's face waiting for the results and exploding with joy when she heard about what happened. And I thought, well, I understand a little bit what she must feel like, but really, I wish I was in her place today, because that's a unique feeling, and that's the future as well. So today, if I had a dream, it would be to be a project director for this kind of program. Yeah.
And I'm sure you've enjoyed many of those highs throughout your career. Looking back, what are you most proud of, and what would you like to be remembered for by those in the industry?
Well, I am very proud of the 2 projects that I managed myself and led to success. Of course, I managed them, but all this was thanks to all the teams, not to me, but I'm very proud of the achievements. I'm very proud to have done that. Project managers, they tend to be a little bit at the top of the news for a little while, for a few years, where they manage the project, and then the slope is very steep. Once the project is started, everybody forgets about the project, and it's all about running the facilities, which is fine, which I have no problem with. But I would love the teams who are today operating pass flow in Angola, and still for many years, and the teams who are operating ICHTHYS for 40, 35 years to come. I'd like them to remember myself, but also the teams that were working with me to put this project on stream and spent a lot of time and effort to do that, yeah.
Well, no doubt they will be thinking of you plenty, I'm sure, having led all those successful big projects. Thank you so much, Louis, for joining us here on LNG TV. Have a lovely day in the south of France.
Well, thank you very much, Ali and Will. It's been a pleasure, and I hope the weather gets better in London, and I hope we can all travel and meet face-to-face very soon.
So do I. Thank you so much, Louis, and thank you also for watching this latest episode of LNG Leaders.